I think later on, I think we'll do our meditation, then I'll talk about something that came up today, and it came up during the retreat, and that is the three marks or the three characteristics of existence. Anicca, dukkha, and anattā. Does everybody know what that is? Some of, yeah. Impermanence, dukkha, and non-self, selflessness. So I think we'll talk about that a little bit after the meditation. But if we, sometimes if we bring too prominent, a real prominent subject up in our meditation, it can, before the meditation, it can kind of throw off the meditation. This meditation is supposed to be as wordless as possible. So, but I would say one thing, that these three marks of existence are actually insights from the Buddha, and he said that these same insights are available for us, and that's why he taught them. That's why he put them out there. And so they're a realization that we can have, and most likely that type of insight at that depth would probably come when we're meditating. That's one of the whole ideas behind Vipassana, or insight meditation, is to have these insights and to notice that they are insights anyway. And the insights are the truth for us, the truth for all beings. And as I mentioned at the retreat last Sunday, the Buddha spoke the truth. I believe he did anyway. And it was a truth, from his own understanding. And for the most part, these things that he taught 2,600 years ago are still true today. So, and they always will be true, because they are the truth. If they weren't the truth, if he spoke one untruth, and somebody said that's not true, then the whole thing would probably fall apart. We can have certain beliefs in things. We can have certain ways that are, certain things are difficult to understand. And one of them is certainly the idea of anattā. Yeah, anattā is a very tricky subject, and it's one that very difficult to understand. It's one that's very difficult to even teach. And like I was saying, it's exclusive to Buddhism. Theravada Buddhism, actually. And we'll see if we get a chance to talk about that after.
So Mahayanas don't acknowledge that, or they?
No, they look at it as emptiness, which is a little bit different look at it. It's similar, but it's a little bit different. Emptiness is empty of inherent existence, which is a trademark of anattā, or non-self, to an extent, but they are different. We'll talk about that, after the meditation. See if we can clear up anything, and see if there's any questions and that kind of. So exactly what I said about getting too wordy before our meditation is exactly what we did. So. Let's go into the meditation, and I'll do a little guiding, maybe in the area of insight and some of the possibilities. Please make yourself comfortable. With the eyes closed, just bring your attention to some aspect of the body. It could be any sensation within the body. It could be the breath. Whenever we bring our attention to the body, we are generally pretty present. We can bring our attention and actually our focus to something, we're inviting presence. this present moment alertness. And if the mind gets used to that presence, then it can stay there for longer periods of time by seemingly trusting it, resting in it. This presence is very much like solitude in a way. We can't go outside to find solitude, and we can't even find solitude in our own homes unless we turn off the mind somewhat, turn it back. In other words, we can't find solitude or presence outside of the mind, but we can find it by going within. And within this presence, we're not turning anything off. We're not trying to change anything. If we're doing anything, we're letting go of any kind of attachments that we might have to thoughts or ideas. So the practice is very, very simple. And the difficult part, of course, is doing it on a daily basis. And so when we meditate, it's like we're reducing more and more. We're letting go more and more. Like a reduction of thoughts and the need to be planning and looking into the future or the past. But it doesn't necessarily turn off the mind or what we might call the brain. And sometimes it stimulates insight for us. Insight can arise. Insight into how we can be or not be fulfilled in life, why we aren't, and how we can be. And insight into how our senses play this game by going out into the world and connecting with material form. And then there's the insights that we can look at in the area of Dharma. And these truths that arise. The simplest possibly might be the the fact that our suffering comes from our excessive desiring or wanting things to be different. All the way to the understanding of karma, to the understanding of impermanence and dukkha or suffering, and teachings of non-self, perhaps. And so insights can come in many different forms. They can be very simple. Sometimes we just might feel as if we are a part of nature in such a way that we're almost like a living tree or an animal, and really no difference except we're wearing clothes and we build houses. And we work for a living, as opposed to, being always living in nature and being a part of nature in such a way that everything is purely natural, just living on instinct and intuition. All the way to understanding, the deepest nature of reality, of who we truly are. And so we can have very natural understandings or very spiritual, deep understandings. Even cosmic understandings when it comes to insight. And we can't force insight, and then it's not something that we're trying to work for or meditate towards or to even train for. We're just clearing the mind by letting go of any kind of mental or even physical attachments. And if insight arises, we just check it out to see if it's the absolute truth. The truth beyond any kind of presupposing or guessing, without even that much analytical thought, just a feeling and understanding that it is the ultimate truth for us and for all beings. And so these are things that we can look for when they arise in our meditation. And just to know that they can arise and it is possible, and it's one of the many benefits of the practice. Vipassana, or insight meditation. May each one of us and all beings be well, happy, and peaceful. May no harm come to us. May no difficulties come to us. May we all meet with spiritual and worldly success. And may we have the patience, the courage, and the understanding to meet and overcome any problems or difficulties that we may face. Thank you, everyone. Wanted to get, come back to the topic of insight and the three characteristics or the three marks of existence. These teachings by the Buddha are kind of they're trademarks of Theravada tradition, and the Buddha used them in many of his many different teachings, and they're part of the Anapanasati, the Satipatthana, and many other. They're mentioned many other times, especially mentioned alone. When he mentions impermanence, a lot, and dukkha, of course, suffering, a lot of times, and they all kind of intertwine. And of course, the hardest one, like we were mentioning before, is anattā to understand. But to come into that, first of all, and it's these three. They're called three marks of existence. That they're the characteristics that everybody and everything shares. And that first one is impermanence. And first thing we understand is the intellectual understanding. That everything is impermanent. And I know when I first heard that, I thought, well, that's interesting, but there's got to be something out there. And then, the mind kind of searches for something that's permanent, And the only thing that's really permanent is the idea that everything's impermanent. All right? Got that one? So the idea of impermanence is a permanent, a permanent thing, because it's just a way of life. If we could find something that was permanent, it would be so valuable, because it goes against everything. It's just like in dukkha or suffering, unsatisfactoriness, this other mark of existence. If we found something that actually provided, lasting happiness, that was a material thing, it would be invaluable. It would be the most valuable thing that we could lay our hands on, something that actually provided lasting happiness for us. And there's false prophets out there, a lot of them, like this new car or this new food or these anything, these compression stockings or whatever, all these different things that are just one. That's a long story. That's a long story.
Compression stockings come into your. Even getting a pet, like that's another.
A pet, yeah.
Getting a pet.
That little kid. That little kitten. I want that little kitten so bad, and it turns into be an Athena, like Terry's kitten. No, Athena's an angel, 75% of the time. Impermanence. Yeah, even in the angelistic world, there's impermanence. So we can see that impermanence. If we're trying to find happiness in an impermanent world, it's not gonna work. The closest thing that we can come to is to find the happiness that's inside of us. But actually, that's impermanent too. It's not as impermanent as that form. Connecting with the form and attaching to form out in the world. It just grows old for us, and we know that. We forget about it, and we think, well, I know that if I attach to this, I'll be happy for a while, and then that'll fade. And I'm an adult, I can handle that, but I'm going to go after this next thing anyway, and then this next thing, and then this next thing, and next thing, and that is the law of dukkha. And dukkha is the word kind of, it points to like a squeaky wheel on a chariot, which is likened I see it similar to like a squeaky wheel on the grocery cart at the grocery store. You know, there's 100 carts that you can choose from. You pull one out and you from outside, you get inside and you realize that there's a clunk, clunk, clunk and a squeak. And you're going through the entire store and this, you know, to have this wonderful, joyous shopping experience, and your grocery cart is going squeak, squeak, squeak. You know, people look at you when you go by and they go, this poor person with this rotten grocery cart. But it's just an agonizing kind of like kind of like the, you know, like it can be for a barking dog or something like that, where it's kind of a reminder that, you know, that I don't have peace of mind, that it's just kind of there again and again. And, you know, those are just an example of a lot of the many experiences that we have in life. And for the most part, we can get by a lot of that, you know, by setting aside our preferences. You know, like I don't have a preference to have a perfect grocery cart. This is fine. I can do with it, and it works. You know, we can be happy with that, but not, you know, there's still not permanent happiness. You know, and ideally, I think that's what we're looking for. To have this permanent peace of mind anyway. And if it's not possible in impermanent things, then it's and everything's impermanent, then we have to really look at our preferences, you know, and see what we're working towards, what we're going after, you know. And so those are the first two characteristics of existence, impermanence and suffering, or what is called dukkha. And then the third one we touched on already is probably one of the hardest concepts for people to understand, and it certainly is hard to teach, and that's anattā, which has several translations, but you know, for most people know it as not self or non-self. There's some other literal translations that I've heard people use that, like more like not itself, you know, something like that. But it's also called selflessness, like the idea that there's a self, you know, not a self behind any of this. And there's many different ways to look at it and tear it apart. But probably the three most common ways are to see it from one point of view as that there is, you know, we could say no control, that there's a lack of control from our side. Another way is looking at the individual parts and how they tear down, that we can't find a self within that. And then another way is that everything is as if it's borrowed, that we're just borrowing it, and it's got to return, since it's impermanent, it has to return back to where it came from. And so that's how these three marks of existence, characteristics of existence, come together. Terry asked about the Mahayana teaching of, she said, is non-self, and I said non-self was a Theravada teaching, and she said, doesn't the Mahayana have a non-self teaching? And their teaching is actually it's more of a selflessness, or a emptiness, and that emptiness. So that aspect of emptiness is actually a part of anattā in a way. And the example given from both schools, I guess you could say, both sects of Buddhism, is that if we take, we can use a lot of things as an example. But I guess one of the examples that I like to use is an autopsy. And the reason being is because when I would go to Thailand, every time I went there, I had to go to an autopsy. It was a part of the training, you know, and we were right by the university at Chiang Mai in Thailand, and they would invite us in for these autopsies.
What's an autopsy?
That's when you cut open the body and
Oh, an autopsy.
Autopsy.
autopsy. Yeah,
Shifts the word around a little bit. Autopsy.
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 Autopsy. There's no autopsy. Autopsy.
A-U-T.
Okay.
Like auto. Autopsy.
Okay. I've been mispronouncing it for 60 some years now.
Yes.
I haven't been talking that long.
I thought that was what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was not
Maybe
sure.
something else.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something else.
Yeah. We would sit through those, and the reason well, actually stand through them because there was no sitting room, but we would watch these autopsies, and the reason that they had us do it, it was at these retreats that I would go to in Thailand, and even young people, you know, would go, and the reason they would do that is to show show us that there is no, it sounds bizarre, but to show us that there is no self within the body, that we're cutting it all up and it's just parts. And so when you take away all these parts and divide all these parts, you know, where is the human or where is the self? And it's just a label. You know, there's an arm here and there, you know, a part over here and a part over here and a part over here, but it's just pieces. And then we put all that together, you know, and we can put it all together and have a funeral or whatever, and we have a body. We might even have a Joe, or, you know, give it a name. So it's just labels that we put on all of this, like this body, this Shane-ness. There's no Shane-ness here, just like there's really the humanness is just a label too. It's all labels. Like if we have a car, like if we take a car and take it apart, like at a junkyard, you know, we take off the wheel, and we take off the steering wheel and the fender and the hood and the seats, and we have all these different parts that, like, we're going to scrap a car. You know, you got all these different parts. The carness is not there anymore. It's just pieces. In other words, that label of car is not there. We might have a nice wheel, we might not have a nice hood or a nice fender, but the car is gone. And so that's the relation between non-self and emptiness. That it's empty of inherent existence. That inherent existence is that the car does not stand on its own, or the body does not stand on its own. Nothing can exist on its own. And so that's usually the example, or one of the primary examples that's used for emptiness and for non-self. In empty or of inherent existence. Nothing to stand on by ourselves. Like, none of us would be here if it wasn't for our parents. Our parents wouldn't be here if it wasn't for their parents. So these are just another way of looking at all these different parts that come together. If we, when we die, our body will go into pretty much what it was made out of in the first place, you know, the body itself. You know, basically a bunch of chemicals, nitrogen and carbon, yeah, there's some potash and things like that, you know, that will break down, will make really good fertilizer, you know, but that's about it, really. Nourish the plants and everything that's out there. It breaks down properly. And that's another aspect of anattā, whereas everything is borrowed. It goes back to where it came from. So there's no ownership over this. then we might say, well, yeah, but there's the mind. Maybe the self is contained within the mind. Maybe not the body, but the mind. And that gets a little tricky too, because there's nothing tangible. We were talking about form earlier, and usually when people think of a lasting self, they think of it like a soul. Or they do in the West anyway, where there's almost like a little likeness of us, that will go off into heaven or something. And if not an actual piece of form, like a piece of consciousness, like the consciousness would be considered the self. But the Buddha said there's the consciousness dies along with it goes along with the body. It's one of the aggregates, and when you put all these things together, this is what you get. But when they fall apart, there's nothing that holds them together. In other words, the form, feelings, the thought formations, the thinking apparatus, perception, how we perceive things, and then consciousness. These are the things that the Buddha said that make up these 5 aggregates. And he said, but none of them are the self, and not any one of them by themselves is the self either. And another way to express or explain, try to explain anyway, non-self is to look at the lack of control that we have. If there was a self or somebody in charge, we wouldn't likely want to get sick. We wouldn't likely not want to grow old. And if they're, without a self that's in charge, why would we even say that there is a self, or some kind of a self that can control things? Or even, so it points to the idea that this is a very choiceless situation that we're in. It seems like we have choices, but from the standpoint of this is what we get from that standpoint. And what I mean by that is that if let's say we make a choice on clothes. I'm going to wear black tonight because I always wear black. But I'm going to wear black tonight because that's the color that suits me, and I have a lot of black clothes. I put black clothes on. I don't have to think outside of my little box. I can just wear black and go out and do my thing, and I like black, so but when we really look at that, I wouldn't think of coming here without any clothes on. So I don't really have a choice. I want to have clothes on because I want to stay warm. If it's in the summertime, I want to keep the insects off me. But more so, I want to get along with society. I want to wear clothes. I would look silly up here, sitting up here naked, or even without a shirt on or anything. And so that's not my choice, but I am going to conform to that. I'm going to conform to that thing. So I have to wear clothes. It seems like I have a choice on the colors and things like that. But sometimes maybe the color that I really want isn't out there, That's kind of why we go shopping. We're looking for new things, and sometimes we don't find what we want. And we can kind of look at that with everything. We like certain foods. We like certain things to drink. But yet, possibly, if there was somebody in control, like a self, maybe we wouldn't have to eat at all. Maybe we wouldn't have to drink. We could just suffice just the way it is. No drinking, no eating, no aging. All we would do is get happier and smarter. We would live as long as we want to live. and wear clothes when we want to wear clothes, or all these different things that show that there is a self that is in control.
We don't have ultimately, we can make small choices about small things, but ultimately birth, aging, sickness, and death
Overrides
really,
everything.
it's everything. We have no choice in that. Those are things we're going to experience, so it really is choiceless. We can make small choices, but the big stuff is the inevitable.
Yeah. Yeah, and as humans, it seems like we have a lot of choices too, compared to like a cat or something like that. And well, maybe they feel like they have more choices than we do. I don't know what they're thinking.
It does.
Maybe
Yeah.
they feel more liberated than us.
Scratchy around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Humans have lots of limitations.
yeah. But then, cats are very impermanent. We might even look at them as being much more impermanent as we are, losing fur all the time, and they don't live as long as we do, and all these, different things. We seem to use cats as examples a lot here.
We're all cat
But-
lovers here, right?
Terry sitting here.
That's
Yeah.
Mark.
Mark and Terry.
Yeah.
Cat owner.
But those are some of the examples, and anattā is probably one of the more difficult things to understand, and usually it doesn't happen overnight, as you can imagine. And when we look at the fetters, the very first fetter that the Buddha said for us to awaken up is to have that realization, to understand that anattā, the also called identity view, what is actually here. And I didn't use the word ego because sometimes that's a cop-out, that the Buddha was saying, he means watch the ego, take care of the ego, and don't let the ego get out of hand. And of course that has something to do with it too, whatever we're calling the ego. The bottom line is that when we attach to the world of form, we can have a sense of self. We know that the self is there because it's sticky. And the more attachment we have to form, without being aware of what's going on, the more, it's almost like the heavier and more established the self gets. So when we meditate, we close our eyes and we find ourselves in a nice posture. We don't worry so much about the past and the future. Hopefully that disappears and the body kind of disappears. And then we get a taste of that anattā. We get a taste of non-self, which could be likened to the experience of the closest experience that we might have in this lifetime to death, to being non-existent to a certain extent, to being not so thrown into the complexities of life, and not being so worried about the form, any form at all. And it's just through conditioning of the mind. We sit in meditation, focus, become present, and we can actually feel lighter when we come out of that. And it's my feeling that it's because there's much less of that self being a part of it. And I think that's really the first step. And I think that's the important thing that I'm trying to get across, is to try to be aware of what anattā is and what it means to feel any kind of release or liberation from, carrying that burden of the self around. And I don't know, that's a lot. The understanding is deep. A lot of times people mix it up with lots of the other teachings, including emptiness. So I'm glad Terry asked that question, about emptiness and non-self. And that's about all I got. And it's a little bit
Chew
out.
on for a while.
Yeah, well.
That's a lot.
Anyway, so unless there's any questions or anything, I will.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, please.
The burden of self, is that a human burden, or do you, for instance, and I won't go with domestic animals like back to the cat example, but an eagle, do you think an eagle is naturally an eagle?
Selfless?
Yeah, without the burden of soul, self that we as human beings, which, can be nice, but can also carry quite a burden, the idea of.
Yeah, they're living on instinct and intuition, so they have fear, and so they have that self-protection mechanism, the same way we do. But I don't think they have beyond the natural, in the natural characteristics. There's another word I'm looking for, but beyond that, there is the survival, and they're doing everything that they're supposed to do. But I don't think they have that attachment that we do,
Yeah.
and that's the difference. Yeah, they have like a mallard and the two ducks. The two ducks mate for life, and then when one dies, they feel. I think they feel bad, but a lot of it is instinct. That they are supposed to stay together and mate for life. That's the characteristic of the ducks, and and we could examine every animal that way. But I don't think they have that attachment that creates the self that we're referring to. That's my. You'd have to talk to a duck or a cat, I guess, and see what they say. But that's my feeling. I don't think they. I don't think they have that self. And so, are they more awake than us? I don't necessarily think that's their nature. In some ways, they probably are. Like a dog is just naturally happy. You can slap your dog and he'll come back and want to play more. Whatever. It's just they're just so loving beings, most of them. But they have their ups and downs too, like everybody else or everything else.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I'm-
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week, and thank you for everything.
They do.